Love. In a world divided by race, religion, and tradition, The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed unfolds as a sweeping epic of forbidden passion, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of dignity. Set against the vibrant yet turbulent backdrop of Sudan and stretching across continents, this novel traces the harrowing journey of Insaf, a young Arab woman, and Deng, her African lover, as they defy the suffocating boundaries of family, faith, and society. Through trials of scandal, exile, and persecution, their love becomes both a battleground and a beacon, challenging the deepest prejudices and illuminating the universal longing for freedom and acceptance. With unflinching honesty and profound empathy, Dr. Ahmed crafts a story that is as much an indictment of injustice as it is a celebration of the human spirit's capacity to endure and to love against all odds. Where tradition, faith, and identity collide, unfolds an epic tale of forbidden love, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of dignity. The Abominable Love traces the harrowing journey of Insaf, a young Arab woman, and Deng, her African soulmate, as they defy the suffocating boundaries of race, religion, and social expectation. Sweeping from the dusty streets of Gadaref to the bustling cities of Khartoum, Port Sudan, Bombay, and London, this novel plunges readers into a world where love is both a crime and a salvation. Through persecution, exile, and the shadow of death, Insaf and Deng's story becomes a powerful testament to the courage it takes to love and to survive when the world is determined to keep you apart. In the burning heart of Sudan, where ancient prejudices and sacred traditions rule with an iron fist, a love story is born that dares to defy the world. The Abominable Love is not just a tale, it is a raw, aching journey through the agony and ecstasy of forbidden passion. Insaf, a luminous Arab girl, and Deng, her proud African beloved, are swept into a relentless storm of betrayal, violence, and exile simply for loving across the lines others have drawn in blood. Their story surges from the dust-choked alleys of Gadaref to the chaos of Khartoum, the teeming streets of Bombay, and the gray skies of London, each page pulsing with heartbreak, hope, and the desperate courage to survive. Through prison bars, courtroom battles, and the shadow of the gallows, Insaf and Deng cling to each other, wounded, hunted, but unbroken. This is a novel that will grip your soul, shatter your certainties, and remind you that sometimes love itself is the greatest act of rebellion. Amid the unforgiving landscapes of Sudan and the tangled streets of distant cities, The Abominable Love shines as a luminous testament to the unbreakable human spirit. This is the story of Insaf and Deng, two souls from worlds apart, whose love is battered by prejudice, injustice, and exile, yet never extinguished. Through every trial, imprisonment, betrayal, and the threat of death, their hope endures, a quiet flame that refuses to be snuffed out. Even as the world conspires to keep them apart, Insaf and Deng rise again and again, drawing strength from each other and from the dream of a life where love is not a crime. Their journey, stretching from the deserts of Sudan to the crowded avenues of Bombay and the gray skies of London, is a powerful reminder that hope can survive the darkest night and that resilience is the greatest act of all. This is not just a tale of survival, but of the courage to believe in a brighter tomorrow, no matter how impossible it may seem. In the darkest hour of her life, as the iron bars of a foreign jail closed around her and the world seemed to have turned its back, Insaf cradled her newborn son and whispered a promise into the silence: "We will survive this." It was in that moment, hungry, alone, and accused, that hope became her lifeline. The Abominable Love is born from this single, defiant act of faith, a mother's refusal to surrender, a lover's determination to endure, and the quiet, unbreakable thread of resilience that binds two souls across continents and calamities. From the suffocating courts of Sudan to the crowded streets of Bombay and the gray dawns of London, Insaf and Deng's journey is illuminated by the courage to hope when all hope seems lost, and the strength to rise, again and again, for love. In plot summary, The Abominable Love is an epic novel that follows the tragic and tumultuous journey of Insaf, a beautiful and intelligent Arab girl from Sudan, and Deng, a black African boy from South Sudan. Their love story unfolds against a backdrop of deep-seated racism, religious conservatism, and social injustice in Sudanese society. Key plot points. Forbidden love. Insaf and Deng fall in love as teenagers, but their relationship is forbidden due to racial and cultural prejudices. She is a Northern Arab Muslim, and he is a Southern African from the Dinka tribe. Family and social rejection. When Insaf's family discovers the relationship, her father locks her away, shaves her head, and subjects her to further trauma, including forced circumcision and a virginity test. She is eventually forced into an arranged marriage with an elderly man, Haj Taha. Tragedy and scandal. On her wedding night, Insaf kills Haj Taha in self-defense when he tries to rape her. She flees, becoming a fugitive. Meanwhile, a dead infant is found in her neighborhood, and Insaf is falsely accused of adultery, infanticide, and bringing shame to her family. Flight and persecution. Insaf escapes across Sudan, facing abuse, blackmail, and further violence. She is repeatedly accused of crimes she did not commit, including murder and prostitution. She is imprisoned, tried, and sentenced to death, but receives a presidential pardon after public protest. Exile and new trials. Insaf flees to India, where she is again falsely accused, this time of drug trafficking. She gives birth to Deng's child while in jail, but is eventually bailed out by a compassionate Indian Christian family. Conversion and further persecution. Isolated and rejected by her own community, Insaf finds acceptance with the Indian family and converts to Christianity. This leads to further threats from Sudanese religious leaders and the risk of extradition. Reunion and refuge. After a series of legal battles and near deportations, Insaf is finally reunited with Deng, who has been left disabled by state violence. With the help of international advocates, they are granted asylum in the UK and later resettle in Canada, where they build a new life and family together. Core themes: racism and colorism, religious and social oppression, gender-based violence, resilience and sacrifice, the search for justice and belonging. In essence, the novel is a sweeping, multi-country saga of love, injustice, and survival, highlighting the destructive power of prejudice and the enduring strength of love and hope. The Abominable Love is a novel that weaves a complex narrative, but it also makes a series of explicit and implicit arguments, social, cultural, religious, and political, through its plot, characters, and commentary. Here's a structured summary of the main arguments the document makes. 1. Racism and social prejudice. The novel strongly argues that racism and tribalism are deeply entrenched in Sudanese and, by extension, broader Arab and African societies. It highlights the taboo and social consequences of interracial relationships, especially between Arab women and African men. The story shows how both families and communities enforce racial boundaries, often with violence, ostracism, and legal action. 2. Patriarchy and gender oppression. The narrative exposes the extreme control fathers and male relatives exert over women's lives, including forced marriage, confinement, and violence. It criticizes practices such as female genital mutilation, FGM, forced virginity tests, and the lack of agency for women in choosing their partners. The novel presents the suffering of women as a direct result of patriarchal customs and religious interpretations. 3. Religious law versus secular law. The book contrasts Islamic Sharia law with secular legal systems, arguing that Sharia is used to justify racial discrimination, gender oppression, and harsh punishments, flogging, death penalty, etc. It suggests that secular, Western legal systems are more just, especially in their treatment of women, minorities, and refugees. The narrative is critical of religious authorities and their power to override even presidential pardons. 4. Hypocrisy and corruption in authority. The story depicts religious leaders, police, and government officials as corrupt, hypocritical, and often self-serving. It argues that these authorities manipulate laws and religious doctrine for personal or political gain, rather than justice. 5. The plight of refugees and migrants. The novel follows the protagonists through Sudan, India, and the UK, showing the difficulties faced by refugees, legal limbo, racism, lack of support, and the threat of deportation. It argues that international institutions, like the UN, and host countries often fail to protect the most vulnerable, especially women fleeing gender-based violence or religious persecution. 6. Religious conversion and apostasy. The narrative explores the dangers and social consequences of leaving Islam, especially for women. It argues that apostasy laws are used to control and punish dissent, and that conversion to Christianity, or any other faith, is seen as a betrayal deserving of death. 7. Love as resistance. The central love story is presented as an act of resistance against racism, patriarchy, and religious intolerance. The novel argues that true love transcends race, religion, and social class, but is constantly threatened by societal forces. 8. Critique of Sudanese and broader Muslim societies. The book is highly critical of Sudanese society, especially the intersection of Arab identity, Islam, and racism. It argues that these societies are plagued by hypocrisy, misogyny, and a lack of compassion, especially towards women and minorities. 9. Western societies as a haven, with caveats. While the West is depicted as more just and tolerant, the novel also acknowledges ongoing racism and challenges for immigrants and converts. The protagonists ultimately find safety and acceptance in Canada, but only after enduring significant hardship. 10. Author's perspective. The author, who claims to have converted from Islam to Christianity, uses the story to argue that Christianity and secular values offer a more compassionate and just alternative to the problems described in Muslim societies. The book is positioned as both a personal testimony and a broader critique of Islamic law and culture. Summary table of key arguments. Theme argument/position. Racism deeply rooted in society, especially against Black Africans in Arab countries. Gender and patriarchy. Women are oppressed by family, law, and religion. Religious law. Sharia is depicted as unjust, especially for women and minorities. Authority and corruption. Religious and legal authorities are corrupt and self-serving. Refugee experience. Refugees face systemic injustice and lack of protection. Apostasy and conversion. Leaving Islam is dangerous and criminalized. Love. True love is revolutionary and subversive. Critique of society. Sudanese/Muslim societies are portrayed as hypocritical and oppressive. Western societies more just, but not without their own problems. Author's perspective. Christianity and secularism are presented as preferable alternatives. Main characters.
Insaaf Salah Al-Junaid.
The central character, an Arab girl from Gadaref, Sudan. Her life story, struggles, and relationships drive the entire novel. Ding Majak Nasser, Ding. An African boy from South Sudan, Dinka tribe, Insaf's first and true love. Their relationship is the core of the novel's conflict.
Haj Salah Al-Junaid, Abu Shanab.
Insaf's strict Arab father, whose actions and beliefs shape much of her fate.
Hajah Amina.
Insaf's mother, complicit in her daughter's suffering due to social and religious pressures. Haj Abdullah Othman. A kind Muslim man who rescues Insaf from the streets and treats her as a daughter.
Hajjah Maryam.
Haj Abdullah's wife, who becomes a mother figure to Insaf. Safa, Marwa, and Mona. Daughters of Haj Abdullah and Hajah Maryam, they become Insaf's close companions.
Amada, Muhammad Hussein.
The effeminate neighbor, involved in the blackmail and pivotal events in Insaf's life.
Hayashata.
Hamada's aunt, a wealthy and manipulative woman who becomes a pimp and blackmails Insaf. Samir Wad Masood. A wealthy Arab boy from Port Sudan, briefly engaged to Insaf. William David. A Coptic Christian boy, son of Pastor David, who falls in love with Insaf during her time in Khartoum. Pastor David. William's father, a Coptic Christian pastor in Khartoum. Mrs. Matthew, a compassionate Indian Christian woman in Bombay who shelters Insaf and her child. Mark, Lillian, and Emily Matthew. Mrs. Matthew's son, daughter-in-law, and daughter, who become Insaf's surrogate family in India. Ding Jr., Mark, and Emily, children. Insaf and Ding's children, named after their Indian benefactors. Mrs. Ababa Nasser. Ding's Ethiopian Christian mother. Mr. Majak Nasser. Ding's father, a Sudanese army officer. Other notable characters. Badriya Adarub, Insaf's friend and roommate in Khartoum, whose murder becomes a key plot point. Haj Taha, the old man Insaf is forced to marry. Police officer Khalid Muhammad Yahya, a Sudanese police officer who helps Insaf during her journey. Christina, Ding's cousin in India, involved in the drug case. Augustine, Longar, Jimmy, Arik, Julia, Sudanese and African students in India, involved in various subplots. 1. Insaf's love for Ding, Ding Majak Nasser. First and deepest love, Ding is Insaf's first love, and their relationship is the emotional core of the novel. Their love begins as teenagers and is described as innocent, passionate, and sincere. Forbidden and resilient, their love is forbidden due to racial and cultural barriers, Arab versus African, North versus South Sudan. Despite knowing her family and society would never accept Ding, Insaf continues to love him, risking everything. Sacrifice and suffering, Insaf endures immense suffering, imprisonment, forced marriage, mutilation, and public shame because of her love for Ding. Even after being separated, her feelings for him remain strong. Enduring and redemptive, ultimately, Insaf and Ding reunite, marry, and build a family together. Their love survives betrayal, violence, and exile, and is portrayed as transformative and redemptive. 2. Insaf's love for Samir Wad Masood. A relationship of hope and escape. After her traumatic experiences, Insaf's engagement to Samir represents a chance for social redemption and stability. Samir is wealthy, educated, and from a noble Arab family. Lacks depth and passion, while Samir falls deeply in love with Insaf. Her feelings for him are not as strong or passionate as those for Ding. She appreciates his kindness and the security he offers, but she does not love him with the same intensity. Haunted by the past, even during her engagement to Samir, Insaf cannot forget Ding. She admits to herself and to others that her heart still belongs to her first love. Ends in scandal. The relationship collapses when Insaf's past is revealed at the engagement party. She flees and Samir is left heartbroken. 3. Insaf's love for William David. A relationship of refuge and affection. William, the Coptic Christian son of Pastor David, becomes close to Insaf during her time in Khartoum. Their relationship develops in a context of mutual support and shared hardship. Crosses religious boundaries. Like her love for Ding, this relationship is also forbidden, this time due to religious differences, Muslim versus Christian. Both struggle with the impossibility of marriage due to their faiths. Not as deep as with Ding, Insaf cares for William and is grateful for his affection and support, but her love for him is not as consuming or foundational as her love for Ding. She never fully commits to him emotionally. Ends in separation. The relationship ends when William's family and church pressure him to break off the relationship, and Insaf is forced to move on. Summary table. Character, nature of love, depth, barriers, outcome. Ding first, true, passionate, sacrificial, deepest, enduring, racial, cultural, family, reunited, married, family. Samir, hope for redemption, security, respect, gratitude, not passionate, social class. Her past ends in scandal, separation. William, refuge, affection, mutual support, affectionate, not consuming, religious, cultural, ends in separation. Key insights. Ding is Insaf's soulmate. Their love is tested by the harshest circumstances, but ultimately survives. Samir represents what society wants for Insaf, but she cannot give him her heart. William offers comfort and understanding, but their love is never fully realized due to religious and social barriers. Here's a comparison of the hardships Insaf faces during her imprisonment in Sudan and India. Imprisonment in Sudan. Nature of hardship. Physical abuse and torture. Insaf is subjected to severe physical punishment, including beatings and threats of honor killing by her own family. She is locked in her room for months, her hair is shaved, and she is forcibly circumcised a second time. Social isolation. She is cut off from all social contact, forbidden from seeing friends, attending school, or even leaving her home. Public shame and scandal. Insaf is accused of adultery, pregnancy out of wedlock, and murder of her own child. She becomes the center of a public scandal, with her name and reputation destroyed in her community. Legal injustice. She is forced into a marriage with an old man, and when he dies on their wedding night, in self-defense, she is accused of murder and becomes a fugitive. Religious and gender oppression. The legal and social system is deeply patriarchal and religiously conservative, offering her no protection or recourse. She faces the threat of death by hanging and is only saved by a presidential pardon after a highly publicized trial. Conditions. Imprisoned at home. Her prison is her family home, but it is a place of constant surveillance, violence, and psychological torment. No legal rights. She is denied legal representation or a fair hearing until her case becomes a national scandal. Stigma. Even after her release, she is stigmatized and rejected by her family and community. Imprisonment in India. Nature of hardship. Physical conditions. Insaf is held in a women's jail in Bombay, described as filthy, overcrowded, and more like a concentration camp than a prison. She has only one transparent nightgown to wear for weeks, no soap, toothbrush, or basic hygiene supplies. Starvation and deprivation. She receives only one meal a day, insufficient for her and her unborn child. She is forced to share what little she has with other prisoners. Torture and forced confession. Indian police use third-degree interrogation methods, torturing her for 3 days until she falsely confesses to drug trafficking to protect her unborn child. Isolation and humiliation. She is isolated as a foreigner, accused of being a prostitute and drug dealer, and is publicly humiliated by other Sudanese students and prisoners. Legal limbo. She spends months in pretrial detention, with her case repeatedly delayed. She faces the threat of a long prison sentence or deportation to Sudan, where she would face execution. Lack of support. Unlike in Sudan, where her case eventually attracts public attention, in India she is almost entirely alone, with only the help of a Christian Indian family and an anonymous benefactor. Conditions. Jail environment. The jail is described as dirty, dangerous, and lacking basic necessities. She witnesses violence and even deaths among other prisoners. Motherhood in jail. She gives birth while still under threat of imprisonment and deportation, with no certainty about her or her child's future. Legal vulnerability. She is at the mercy of both Indian and Sudanese authorities, with her fate determined by international legal and diplomatic maneuvering. Summary table. Aspect: Sudan imprisonment, India imprisonment. Type: home confinement, later criminal trial, women's jail, pretrial detention. Physical abuse, beatings, forced circumcision, starvation, torture by police, starvation, deprivation. Psychological: family betrayal, public shame, isolation, humiliation, racial abuse. Legal status: accused of murder, adultery, infanticide, accused of drug trafficking, illegal entry. Support: eventually gains lawyer, public attention, only supported by Indian Christian family. Outcome: presidential pardon, but lifelong stigma, acquitted, but faces deportation threat. Motherhood: accused of killing her child, gives birth in jail, fears for child's fate. Key differences. In Sudan, Insaf's suffering is rooted in family, community, and religious oppression, with violence coming from both her relatives and the state. In India, Her suffering is institutional, rooted in the harsh realities of the prison system, xenophobia, and legal vulnerability as a foreigner and accused criminal. If you'd like, I can provide. Here's a comparison of the problems Insaf faces with Mrs. Holy, Haja Shaza, and the Sudanese student in India who accuses her of being a drug dealer and prostitute. 1. Mrs. Holy, Esther, Clementina's mother. Nature of problem. Religious fanaticism and spiritual abuse. Mrs. Holy is a Pentecostal Christian who believes she can cast out demons and discern evil spirits. When Insaf seeks shelter, Mrs. Holy accuses her of being possessed by evil spirits of lying, murder, adultery, and theft. Physical and psychological intimidation. Mrs. Holy physically assaults Insaf under the guise of exorcism, pressing her head, shaking her, and shouting at her, causing Insaf to fear for her safety and sanity. Rejection and stigmatization. Mrs. Holy refuses to let Insaf stay in her house, labeling her as dangerous and evil, and threatens her with exposure and police involvement. Isolation. Insaf is left feeling alone, misunderstood, and further traumatized by someone who claims to be a spiritual authority. Summary. Insaf's problem with Mrs. Holy is rooted in religious extremism, spiritual abuse, and emotional violence, leading to her rejection and further marginalization. 2. Haja Shaza, Hamada's aunt the pimp. Nature of problem. Sexual blackmail and exploitation. Haja Shaza discovers Insaf's criminalized past and uses it to blackmail her, threatening to report her to the police unless she exposes her naked body to a wealthy Saudi client. Coercion and threats. Shaza manipulates Insaf's fear of arrest and execution, forcing her into a degrading and humiliating situation under threat of imprisonment or death. Entrapment and betrayal. Shaza orchestrates a situation where Insaf is secretly photographed naked, intending to use the images for further blackmail and sexual exploitation. Violence and survival. The situation escalates to violence, with Insaf ultimately killing Shaza in self-defense to escape sexual slavery and blackmail. Summary. Insaf's problem with Haja Shaza is one of sexual exploitation, blackmail, and life-threatening coercion, culminating in a desperate act of self-defense. 3. The Sudanese student in India, accusations of drug dealing and prostitution. Nature of problem. Public slander and social ostracism. The Sudanese student publicly accuses Insaf of being a drug dealer and prostitute, shouting insults at her in the Bombay Criminal Court and in front of other Sudanese students. Racial and gendered abuse. The accusations are laced with racist and misogynistic language, targeting Insaf's identity as a Northern Arab woman married to a Southern African man. Physical assault and humiliation. The confrontation escalates to violence when Insaf, in self-defense and humiliation, throws her shoe at the student, blinding him in one eye. Isolation and stigma. The accusations lead to Insaf's further isolation among the Sudanese student community in India, who believe the slander and refuse to support her, leaving her without allies or legal help. Summary. Insaf's problem with the Sudanese student is rooted in public defamation, gendered and racial abuse, and social exclusion, resulting in her humiliation and lack of community support. Comparison table. Adversary type of problem methods used impact on Insaf. Mrs. Holy religious/spiritual abuse exorcism, accusation, rejection emotional trauma, isolation. Haja Shaza sexual exploitation/blackmail, coercion, threats, entrapment threat to life, forced nudity, violence, self-defense killing. Sudanese student, India, public slander, social abuse, verbal abuse, public accusation, physical assault, humiliation, social ostracism, loss of support, legal vulnerability. Key insights. Mrs. Holy represents the dangers of religious fanaticism and spiritual violence, leading to psychological harm and rejection. Haja Shaza embodies sexual exploitation, blackmail, and the threat of physical harm, pushing Insaf to the brink of survival. The Sudanese student in India symbolizes the destructive power of public slander, racism, and misogyny, resulting in social isolation and further legal peril. Certainly. Here's an analysis of the impact on Insaf's character from her encounters with Mrs. Holy, Haja Shaza, and the Sudanese student in India who accuses her of being a drug dealer and prostitute, based on your document. 1. Encounter with Mrs. Holy. Impact. Deepens Insaf's sense of alienation. Mrs. Holy's religious fanaticism and exorcism attempt leave Insaf feeling misunderstood and spiritually violated. Instead of finding refuge, she is treated as a vessel of evil, which intensifies her sense of being an outcast. Erodes trust in authority figures. The experience with Mrs. Holy, who claims spiritual authority but acts with violence and condemnation, makes Insaf wary of those in positions of power, especially those who claim to act in the name of religion. Strengthens emotional resilience. Surviving this ordeal, Insaf learns to rely more on her own judgment and inner strength, rather than seeking validation or safety from others. She becomes more guarded, but also more determined to survive on her own terms. 2. Encounter with Haja Shaza. Impact. Forces Insaf into a fight for survival. Haja Shaza's blackmail and sexual exploitation push Insaf to the brink. She is forced to make impossible choices between her dignity and her safety, between submission and resistance. Catalyzes a shift from victim to survivor. The violence and betrayal culminate in Insaf killing Shaza in self-defense. This act, while traumatic, marks a turning point. Insaf is no longer just a passive victim of circumstance, but someone who will fight back, even at great personal cost. Deepens trauma, but also agency. The experience leaves Insaf with lasting trauma, guilt, fear, and the burden of having taken a life. Yet, it also gives her a sense of agency and the will to resist further exploitation. 3. Encounter with the Sudanese student in India. Impact. Public humiliation and social isolation. The student's public accusations and slurs strip Insaf of her dignity in front of her peers. She is branded as a prostitute and criminal, leading to her ostracism from the Sudanese student community. Intensifies feelings of shame and injustice. The false accusations and the crowd's acceptance of them reinforce Insaf's sense of injustice and the cruelty of social judgment, especially when based on prejudice and rumor. Triggers defiance and self-assertion. Insaf's act of throwing her shoe in self-defense is both a moment of humiliation and a declaration that she will not passively accept abuse. It shows her willingness to stand up for herself, even when outnumbered and unsupported. Overall impact on Insaf's character. Resilience and adaptability. Each encounter, though deeply painful, forces Insaf to adapt, survive, and assert her own worth in the face of relentless adversity. Loss of innocence and trust, repeated betrayals by those who should offer protection, religious figures, community members, women, erode her trust in others and in social institutions. Growth in agency. Insaf moves from being a passive victim to an active survivor. She learns to fight for her own dignity, make hard choices, and assert her voice, even when it means standing alone. Complex emotional landscape. These experiences leave her with scars, trauma, shame, anger, and grief, but also with a deeper understanding of herself and the world's injustices. Empathy and solidarity. Despite her suffering, Insaf often shows empathy to others who are marginalized or abused, suggesting that her hardships have deepened her compassion as well as her strength. In summary, the cumulative effect of these encounters is to forge Insaf into a complex, resilient, and courageous character, one who is marked by suffering but not defined by it, and who ultimately claims her own agency and voice in a hostile world. Here's a description of Insaf's encounter with the religious leader whom she slaps when he tries to snatch her cross. Context of the encounter. After fleeing Sudan and enduring many hardships, Insaf finds herself living in India, where she is eventually taken in by a compassionate Indian Christian family. Over time, She adopts some of their customs and, after a period of spiritual searching and gratitude for their help, she begins wearing a gold cross around her neck, a symbol of her new connection to Christianity and the love she received from the Matthew family. The confrontation. While visiting the International Student Hostel cafeteria in Bombay with her Indian family, Insaf is noticed by a group of Sudanese students, including a prominent religious leader from her hometown of Gadaref. The students are shocked to see her wearing jeans, a sleeveless shirt, and especially the cross, a visible sign of her conversion from Islam to Christianity. The religious leader, described as the head of the Ansar al-Sunnah al-Mohammadiyya group, confronts Insaf in front of the other students. He is angry and accusatory, declaring that she has brought shame to her family, her religion, and her country. He loudly questions her about wearing the cross, implying that she has become an apostate and a disgrace. Escalation and violence. As the confrontation escalates, the leader attempts to physically snatch the cross from Insaf's neck, intending to throw it to the ground and desecrate it. In the process, his hand wanders and touches her chest, which is both humiliating and infuriating for Insaf. In response, Insaf does not back down. Instead, she reacts with defiance and self-respect. She pulled herself back, raised her right hand as much as she could, and brought it down forcefully on the leader's face. The closed cafeteria hall amplified the echo of her powerful slap. Every foreign student heard it as if a bomb has exploded. A dead silence followed. One could hear a pin drop. The religious leader of Ansar al-Sunnah held his cheek with one hand. His red eyes sent sparks of anger towards Insaf. His fleshy, fat cheeks became swollen and reddened with intense anger. His teeth grind together to relieve the pain of the incredible humiliation he has been subjected to at the hands of the so-called apostate Sudanese Muslim woman who had converted to Christianity and become openly an infidel Christian girl. Aftermath. The slap is a public act of resistance and self-assertion. The religious leader, humiliated and furious, threatens Insaf with death, declaring that her act of wearing the cross and slapping him will cost her her life. He leaves, followed by his supporters, and later issues a fatwa against her, calling for her punishment as an apostate. Impact on her identity, as depicted in your document. Here's an analysis of how this moment shapes and reveals her sense of self. Here's an analysis of how this moment shapes and reveals her sense of self.